So welcome everybody. So very pleased to have you join us for another in our TDSB and OISE webinar series that focuses on environmental education. My name is Hilary Inwood. I'm the lead of Environmental and Sustainability Ed at OISE, and very pleased to be working as usual with my colleagues at the TDSB Eco Schools program. Today I'd like to welcome Chris Metropolis, who's here representing the team and doing the recording for us. Thank you, Chris. I'd also like to welcome Maddie Simpkins, who is an intern with the department. And I'd like to welcome Jen Vetter and Pam Miller, who is currently working in the virtual school, but still I know her heart is with us deeply at Eco Schools. So happy to be working with so many of our colleagues that form this partnership between TDSB and OISE. Very special welcome to our panelists, who I will introduce very shortly. Very happy to really be doing a deeper dive. Jacqueline Scott got us off on a wonderful foot a couple of weeks ago, actually probably about a month ago now, I think it was, to introduce us to notions of eco-racism when it came to outdoor education and nature-based learning. And we're going to follow up with 4 more panelists and their perspectives on this topic in relationship to environmental education today. So with that in mind, we always begin our sessions with land acknowledgement, knowing full well that land acknowledgements are just the start, the reminder of the work that we all need to do in terms of decolonization and reconciliation. Today, we've been showing different Indigenous artists as part of this. And today we've got the work of Robert Houle. Robert Houle is a Saulteaux First Nations artist, curator, and critic. He's played a really significant role in the recovery of Aboriginal heritage in the last, 3 or 4 decades, I guess, here in Canada. He draws on Western art conventions to tackle lingering aspects of European colonizations of First Nations people. What you're looking at is just 2 of the 7 works that form the series that's found in the main hall of the Art Gallery of Ontario here in Toronto. It's called The 7 Grandfathers, and it's a really beautiful series of pieces. It was actually commissioned by the AGO in 2014, and it consists of 7 really vibrant and abstract paintings that resemble ceremonial drums that are located at the heart of the gallery. He has intended that the 7 grandfathers reveal the concepts of respect and sharing that form the foundation of the Anishinaabe way of life. These each disc responds to an animal spirit and imparts one of the sacred teachings. The eagle embodies love, the beaver embodies wisdom, the wolf embodies humility, the buffalo embodies respect, the turtle embodies truth, the bear embodies courage, and woodland transformational figure embodies honesty. So these 7 ceremonial drums, which were made specifically for this space that you're looking at in the photograph, symbolize visions of nature and the perceptions of memory. So we're very appreciative of seeing Robert's work today. And with that, I'll just do the land acknowledgement. That we acknowledge that we're hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And with that, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what you can expect. We had posed a question to our 4 panelists today in preparation for this webinar about what can we do to make environmental education more diverse and more equitable. So we'll be going through each of these 4 presenters in turn. They're going to give you a little bit of time to outline their own perspectives, their ideas, their pedagogies that they might be working with at this point in time. We've purposefully drawn from different aspects of education. We have 2 teachers with us. Allison Williams is a TDSB teacher, and Rod Daniels, who is an outdoor educator with the TDSB. We're thrilled to have Matthew Webbe here, who's a TDSB principal, and then Fikile Nxumalo, who is a faculty member at OISE. So we'll be hearing from each of them in turn. We do encourage these sessions to be as interactive as possible. So if you have a question, could I ask you to pop it up into the chat? And we will do our best to stay on top of the questions and ask them at an appropriate moment. We're hoping to have some time at the end to also have some further conversations about this as well. Okay, well, with that, I would like to introduce you to Allison Williams. Allison is a teacher with the Toronto District School Board, and she's currently working via the virtual school platform. She's always been passionate about the environment, and making the outdoors accessible for her students and her families, regardless of where they live, their cultural background, or their prior experiences with the natural world. Allison's currently pursuing her Master's of Education part-time at OISE. We're thrilled to have you with us, Allison, there, and she's focusing on curriculum and pedagogy. She's a deep interest in science and environmental education, as well as community development at the local and international level. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. So today I'm starting off the conversation about how can we encourage greater diversity in environmental education. Okay. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Alison, and I've taught a variety of grades through the Toronto District School Board, mostly primary and junior grades, ranging from the core classroom to special education and other areas in between. I've also had the opportunity to teach internationally and work with educators. And one of the things that I like to see and notice is how they teach science and environmental education, how it's taught in different parts of the world. Okay, for my own interaction with the outdoors began at an early age. I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada, and my parents immigrated to Canada in the late 1960s from the Caribbean and South America. So here's an example of where I grew up. I grew up in Scarborough, and as you can see, it's very green and it's very lush when you look at it from an aerial view. There are lots of green spaces and parks. The second picture is an aerial view of the island of Dominica, where my mother's from. And the connection to nature is very, very prominent in lifestyle and culture. And my father's from Guyana, which is another place that is also really rich in rainforests, and the connection to nature is also there. Whether you live in the city, or the country. So in many countries, outdoor education is not really considered outdoor education. It's part of your everyday life and your everyday experience. So an example that I have here is students grow food for their community school or their family outings. You can go to the water with your family, you go to the beach, or you go to a walk in the woods. The example that I have as a picture here is a school garden in the Philippines, where agriculture is also a part. When you go to school, in some places, when you go to school, working at the school garden is part of what you do. It's not really considered outdoor education, as we would call it here. An example that I have below is a picture of students who are planting cassava in a school in Ghana. It's a middle high school in Ghana. And that's just one of the things that is part of being a member of that school community. So, oh, this is not right. Hold on one second. Okay. So my connection to the outdoors was garnered at an early age and created through gardening. My parents loved gardening. They still continue to do that. And here's an example of allotment gardens here, and I'll explain to those a little later. We participated in a lot of outdoor activities. We like to go outside. I'm a child of the late 70s and 80s, so we spent a lot of time outside. Camping was something that we used to do a lot, and taking walks outdoors. At work, I was part of the eco team, and as part of a team of teachers, we all worked together, and we were really dedicated to enhancing student appreciation of the environment, no matter which part of the city that we lived in. So when I was working in the East, it was one set of circumstances, and when I was working in the West, it was another set of circumstances that we needed to be aware of. At play, and for my own enjoyment, I don't do it right now because my plate is a little bit full, but I used to be a hike leader and an ambassador at Rouge National Urban Park. And the best part about that was there were many people that live in our city who didn't know that Rouge Park actually existed and was there, and how beautiful and lush it was. So that was one of the best things about being an ambassador, is showing them the beauty in nature that exists. When I was on my 4/5, I had a chance to work for Ontario Eco Schools. And the nice thing about that was I got a chance to see how schools in different communities, I was based in York Region, how schools in different communities really fostered environmental education and appreciation for the outdoors in their schools. Okay. So when you're thinking about environmental education and diversifying it, one of the first things that I like to do when it's good as an educator is to help your students to become more aware of the outdoors. So you can do that locally. For example, I have a picture here of some towers. This is in a part of Toronto where there is a high concentration of apartment buildings. So locally, you can do it at home, encouraging your students. For example, what can you see outside your window? Not all of our students live in houses with backyards or access to green spaces right outside their door. But you can find things to do where you can say, what can you see from your window? Within the larger community and the wider community, you can think to yourself, well, as an educator, where are the green spaces that my students would be able to access or my community members would be able to access? It's really important to be aware of that. The picture that I have here is a picture of Morningside Park, and there are many communities surrounding that area. And then you get on a larger level, you can think of your country. So for example, in Canada, what do we do with our waste? Do we recycle it? Do we compost it? Does it go to landfill? And if it goes to landfill, where are the landfills? On an international level, we can also talk to our students about plastics in the ocean, for example. What is the issue that's happening now with plastics, with climate change? So those are all things that you can start kind of in concentric circles. You start locally, wider community, the country, and internationally. But it is very, very important that as an educator, if you want to be open and conscious of diversity, that you are aware of the environment of the community in which you work. So the best way to do that is actually to take a walk. Take a walk in the area where your school is. Notice what types of housing do they have, what kind of needs they have, the socioeconomic levels of the students and the families that you serve. Pay attention to that. Notice the cultural backgrounds. An example that I know is for when sometimes depending on the country or the area of the world where certain families may come from, the connection to the environment might be different. They may be suffering from trauma, say a tsunami or a fire or yearly flooding. So when you're conscious of that, you can understand, oh, well, maybe this is why this happens within my school community. Also, it would be really good to look at the community experiences. So for example, is there a level of violence? Is there a level of poverty? Is there a level of stress? I don't know, COVID-19 has really brought that out or made us more aware of what was underlying for many years. You can ask yourself, were or are the outdoor activities an integral part of the lives of the families with which you work? So for example, you can have, is agriculture part of it? Were they farmers? Are they interested in farming? Could they do work in their balconies, planting trees in their surroundings? And also, especially with the change in our weather, this picture was taken by myself yesterday. What could the seasonal changes mean? So usually seasonal changes mean changes in access. So if you want to be more open, okay, you'll think, who has access to the materials or the equipment that families might need to spend time outdoors? And how can you create an environment and opportunities where they won't necessarily need certain materials or, I can't think of the word, clothing or things that they might need that they might not have access to. Okay. So another thing to consider in terms of diversity and equity is which of the areas are accessible by walking or by public transit. For example, are parks available? Are there parks close by to your school? Are there ravines? Are there conservation areas or trails? Or do you work in a place where it is surrounded by concrete and it's very difficult to walk or take public transit? Who feels comfortable there? So one of the speakers in the last webinar that we had made a really great observation, and she was talking about a black man going on the path or the Pan Am path that was created on their bicycles. And one of the things that struck me was that she mentioned that many of the young men don't really want to ride down the path because they feel harassed, or they feel questioned, or they feel stared at in a certain way as if they shouldn't really be there. So they decide not to participate in that particular activity. So here's an example below of walkability. This was taken from the Walkable City document provided by the Toronto Public Health, and it's called Walkability, Neighborhood Design and Preferences, Travel Choices, and Health. This is focusing on Toronto. And if you take a look at the areas in the picture that are red, those are areas that have really low walkability. So it's very hard for the people in that community to walk to certain things, to walk to grocery stores, to walk and get access to parks. The areas that are lighter, more yellow and more fair, kind of like a peach pale color, those are areas that have high walkability. So if you look, and depending on the area that you're serving as an educator or as a community worker, you'll be able to see that not all of our families have access to walking to trails, to walking to grocery stores and things like that. Be conscious of that. The last thing that I would like to cover is what can be done during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have to take a shift in the way that we introduce or encourage our students to participate in outdoor activities. So what kind of things can they be seen through their window? I did, as I mentioned to Pam just before we started, I'm teaching kindergarten and they're wonderful. So one of the great things about it is we look out our window. So some of my students live in basement apartments or in tall buildings like the towers. And so the one thing that most of us can do is we can look out our window. So we've been doing a squirrel observation over the past 2 weeks. And it was really interesting for them to see that the different things that animals do to prepare for the winter during hibernation or whether or not they hibernate. Other questions that they are interested now in is, why does rain fall? How does snow fall? Why is snow white? So the activity that I did yesterday, because we had beautiful snow, was I took my children outside with me. So this will all depend on the data usage that you have for your phone. But what I did was I took my phone, I connected to my meeting, and I went outside and I showed them the area that I could go to that had snow. And they got a chance to see through my eyes on my phone how they can explore nature, explore snow. And the interesting thing about that is after lunch, many of the children who had snow on their balconies or who had snow access to their backyard, they brought snow in the afternoon for us to explore and to show the rest of the class what would happen when we bring snow inside. So it's kind of opened up a new window where they can see that, the outside is actually, it's more accessible than I think. One of the last things I would like to leave you with in terms of this discussion is knowledge is power. And we all know that the knowledge is power, but opportunities bring the experiences. So for the students that we serve or the community that we serve, we have to understand that not everybody has the same level of opportunity. And with the opportunity, then they can get the experiences that they need. The picture below is like a seed. It's actually a sunflower seed. And the whole idea is if we plant the seed by giving students and communities the opportunity, it can grow and flourish into something different. And their appreciation or their ability to connect with nature will grow. So examples that I have here are access to allotment gardens, bike and walking trails, community gardens. If we find ways to let our families and communities know that these exist, then the chances of them to go out into the outdoors, regardless of their cultural background, their socioeconomic level, will grow, will be greater. So the whole idea in closing is that I would like us to think of how to choose a path of inclusion. So this is a picture of along one of the trails in the Rouge, and I like it. It's a well-worn trail. And on the bottom are all the the needles for pine needles. And we can always decide that we are going to actually choose to take a path of inclusion. And it might not necessarily be the direction that's been, well worn, and it's quite common for most, but we might be able to meander along in the trees to find another way that will give our families what they need. At the end of my slide, I have some useful links in case you're interested. Allotment gardens, and it's mostly Toronto based, so I apologize for those who are not based in Toronto. But there are some really great links that you can find, and this is a window to providing opportunities for our families. So allotment gardens, trail maps, the Humber Arboretum, and also community organizations that will connect families, regardless of where they live, to ways to get in touch with nature. So sometimes it's urban farming, sometimes it's the Evergreen Brickworks, sometimes it's community gardens, and also growing with food. Thank you.
Wonderful, Allison. Thank you so much. I will encourage people, if you have any questions for Allison, to pop them into the chat. I did have one, and I think this was sort of raised by Nikki in the chat as well, that we know some of our students in the TDSB and other school boards don't come with proper clothing to really outside with their teachers. Can you address that a little bit, Allison, about how you've done that? I know you're working virtually right now, but in the past, have you dealt with that in your classrooms?
Sure. So I have dealt with that many times and over many years. So one of the things that I do is I actually have a collection of different types of sizes of clothing for things that I speak to families before, in a private, confidential kind of way, and ask them would they be comfortable if their child is wearing this particular outfit, and if they need it, they can buy it. I've also found ways to make connections. So sometimes they can go to secondhand stores, and it's really important to provide those kind of materials. I know the last school that I was in, we had kind of like a clothing room, and I know many schools have it where if children need a pair of snow pants, or they need a pair of boots, or they need a pair of mittens, they can access it. All they have to do is ask, and the educator can connect them with what they need.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and the other suggestion that'd be made by Nikki was to look at clothing libraries as a way to ensure that all students have accessible clothing. Thank you so much. There are a couple other questions in the chat, but I'm going to try and direct those to some of our other speakers. I want to make sure we leave enough time for everybody to speak today. But thank you so much, Allison, for that. At this point, I'd like to introduce you to Rodway Daniels, who goes by Rod. He's an outdoor education specialist in the Toronto District School Board, who's been facilitating student inquiry for 22 years. As Rod shares what he's learned from the land with students, he hopes to inspire them to deepen their connection to it. Once that seed is planted, the hope is that they too will learn to love and live with respect in the lands where they live. Rod loves the people he works with, and he's always looking to have a good time when he's outside. He's fully himself outdoors, and he is actually outdoors with us today. Rod, we appreciate that. Whether he's camping, biking, snowshoeing, backpack, running trails, or just sitting. Rod's captivated by his wife and finds joy as a dad of a daughter and 2 sons. There's no such thing as bad weather, he says, only bad clothes. That's good advice for all of us to live by in a cold climate as winter is coming, Rod. Rod, I'm going to pop your slide up and know that we're welcoming you to this space today.
All right, thank you very much, Hillary. Also, thank you, Allison, for sharing with us. There's no such thing as bad clothes, but there's such thing as not having enough warmth for your batteries on your devices. So I'm going to talk quickly. We should be okay, but I'm watching my battery drain a little bit. I want to start with a story. I just want to share something that happened recently in this forest that I'm in right now, and just to kind of set the stage as to some of the experiences that happen, I guess, if you're Black. So I came out to this very forest around the end of October to film myself for a video to send out to students prior visiting their classrooms. Something that we're doing with Outdoor Ed right now, a lot of virtual visits. And so it was kind of like an introduction video. On the way here, there's a bridge just over in that direction over there. I'm kind of pointing to my right. I don't know if you can see that. And there was a woman standing there on the bridge, and I just kind of saw her, and I just said hello. I didn't need to cross the bridge. There's a trail that I was going to take that is just before that, so I took the trail. I should explain, she was a white woman, no big deal, and I continued on. I got to where I am now, and I set up the tripod and the camera, and I was just going to practice this video or taking this video. After I got the tripod set up, I noticed the woman following along the same trail that I was on, and that's not uncommon. And I looked over, and she looked my way, and I just continued about what I was doing. And then she took a few more steps, and she looked over again, and then walked a little bit further, and then kind of turned around to look at me. And so I just kind of gave a wave, and then she made it out to the road, which is just over in that direction. And when she got to the road, there was a gentleman walking down the sidewalk, I guess on his way home from work, perhaps. And I knew they weren't connected. They didn't know each other. I could just tell by the body language. And then I saw him looking over this way too, and she was pointing, and they were really trying to, see what's going on. And I didn't have a lot of equipment. I had a tripod and a camera, and whether I was right or wrong, the feeling was that I didn't belong here. The feeling was that, what was I up to? What was I doing here? And the reason that happens is because I've had that feeling before. I've had it throughout my life, and many of us that look like me have had that experience where we just feel like we don't belong in that space because of the way that we're looked at. I'm hoping that's not what it was, but that's what I felt. And it seemed like that's what it was at the moment. Let me back things up, and I want to share my life with you. My mom is from Guyana, South America, just like Allison's father was from Guyana. And my mom grew up in a very very forested area. I once looked it up on Google Earth, and all I saw were trees. And she verified, yeah, I grew up pretty much around trees. My mom was a bit of a rebel girl back then because she would climb mango trees to get the mango fruit, and apparently girls weren't supposed to do that. It's kind of strange, but that's what she did, and I love that about her. She moved up to Canada with my dad, and I was born in Windsor, Ontario, and my mom she quickly adapted to the environment, and so she would send me out in the winter, and this was before kindergarten, I remember, and I would go out, come back in with soaking wet mittens, and she would take them from me, put them on the heat register, and then give me another set of mittens and send me back out. And I would do that multiple times in an evening or during the day. And that could explain why my fingers are the first things to freeze in the winter now. But I've gotten some good gloves now. And go a little bit further on. So when I was a little bit older, and we must have been talking about race, and she told me to bring home whoever I want. And she was referring to a partner. And that was a really important thing for a young man to hear from his mom, that anybody was welcome in her house. It didn't matter what they looked like. And this is all part of, anyways, I'll just continue. Fast forward a little bit more, and I'm at college, and I'm studying a program called Outdoor Recreation Technicians, and we call ourselves ORTs. And in fact, I know at least one ORT is watching this today. Hi, Mel. I was the only person of color. I was the only person of color in that program, and there were some of my cohort there who had never seen a Black person before, and they're from Ontario, and I found that kind of odd, but at the same time, no big deal. It was neat that we had that conversation. What was extra neat was that I felt like I was part of that cohort. I never felt like an outsider. I never felt like less than. It was good. And however, when I look back, it was still missing people of color. It was still missing more Black people, more whomever, whatever you look like from around the world. It was very white. And then fast forward some more, and I was working at a sporting goods store in Toronto, and with a gentleman named Robert. And one day his wife, so Robert was white, and one day his wife, Melissa, who I just referenced, who's Black, she came into the store. I didn't know her, I don't think at all yet. And she said, hey, this place called Forest Valley is hiring. Do you want a job? And I'd heard about Forest Valley, and as soon as I heard that, I was like, yes, of course. So Melissa, told me what I needed to do. And 22 years later, here I am teaching outdoor education. And I want to speak to the people I work with, about the people I work with. I've never felt like I've been on the outside. I've always felt like I belonged there.
I'm not hearing Rod right now. I'm wondering if we've just lost his Wi-Fi because he is outside. And so what we might do, or he had also said he was losing battery because of being outside in the cold. So I wonder if he's lost his battery at this point in time. So maybe what we'll do is at this point, we will welcome our next speaker, if that's possible. And then we can pick up where we've left off with Rod when he comes back into the Zoom room. How about that? We'll try it that way. So at this point, what I would like to do is welcome our next speaker, and that's Matthew Webbe. Matthew goes by they, them, and theirs. And Matthew is a Toronto-born Afro-Latinx educator of Caribbean, Cuban, Jamaican, St. Kitts and Nevis, Spanish, and African descent. He's an elementary principal with the Toronto District School Board, with 20 years experience as an educator both internationally and in Canada. Currently, he's the principal of Queen Victoria PS in Parkdale. That's a very large and culturally diverse school in the downtown west area of Toronto. Matthew is passionate about serving and supporting students, families, and community partners through an anti-racist, anti-biased, and anti-oppression framework. He's also passionate about environmental education and the role that it has in the public school system, through its equity connections through Black and Indigenous peoples. Matthew believes that environmental education is a lens through which both these cultural groups can understand their historical contributions, skills, and importance within Canadian society. He believes that current Indigenous and racialized students have a place and a contribution to make to environmental education, which can create additional safe spaces and bring up meaningful connections, mentorship, and learning opportunities for these marginalized groups. So Matthew, I'd like to welcome you to the webinar today.
Thank you, Hillary, and thank you, guests. Can everyone hear me? Yes, okay. When asked to speak about this topic, I thought about the lens of my career as an educator, as an urban planner, and as a social worker in the city of Toronto. And when we ask the question, what can be done to make environmental education more diverse and equitable? It all starts with history. And what I mean by it starts with history is making the connection for Black and Indigenous students, understanding the impact colonialism has had on environmental education and displacing peoples across Canada. More solely, when I speak about the lens in which colonists went to Africa, displaced people of African heritage, when colonists came to Canada and displaced Indigenous peoples, their reaction, their response, their stance is a form of environmental education. It was them defending their land, defending their place, defending their space in the global sphere of people. It's also important that as students understand, and families, the history of and the context of environmental education, it's also important for us to recognize that environmental education belongs to everybody. The environment belongs to everyone. What brings to mind when I think about making the environmental education more diverse and equitable is I'm currently reading a book by Ingrid Waldron, There Is Something in the Water, which chronicles the resistance of the Indigenous peoples and Black communities throughout Canada and their resistance in the sphere of environmental education. I look back and I think about the trials and tribulations of Africville many years ago in Nova Scotia. And I look about the trials and tribulations of the many Indigenous peoples across Canada who are struggling to preserve the land and their way of life, and is being combated through politics and big finance. I also reflect back onto our most modern experience in the GTA. I'm not sure if many people recognize or remember the McClure Crescent situation in North Malvern. Heads, nods. The McClure situation happened back in the 90s when the provincial government was encouraging development of what is now called the area of Malvern in the northeastern part of Scarborough. It was an opportunity for low income and Black, predominantly from the Caribbean families, to be able to buy their first home in Scarborough. It is what is now called the community of Malvern, which is east of Markham Road, north of 401, and to the east boundary would be Rouge River. When developers went into the community and developed the land used to be owned by the federal government, parcels of it, where they used a particular type of radioactive substance to create airplane pathways on some farmland. And when the federal government sold the land to the province and then therefore sold it to developers, some of this radioactive material was left in the soil. And then came the development of housing at the corner of McLevin Avenue and McClure Crescent. And what people of color do not recognize is that was one of the foremost and predominant movements of environmental education and environmentalism in Toronto, where the Black and Caribbean community was challenging the government to clean up the toxic waste, hold them accountable for allowing housing to be developed, knowing full well that radioactive particles were being leached into the soil. I give you this story as a modern day story of what can we do to make environmental education more diverse and equitable, is by bringing these stories of inequities and injustices to racialized individuals, to the surface, to allow our students to understand these tragedies and situations on a global perspective and its direct and local impact. It's important, of course, as leaders and educators, to make sure that we impart upon our students that social justice is environmental education. It is a movement of a different sphere, but a movement nonetheless. When I look back and I say the connections with situations like with Black Lives Matter, fighting for equity and justice throughout the GTA and around the world, and trying to reclaim places and spaces for themselves to have voice and safety and security and a decent way of life. Looking in terms of environmental education, in terms of diverse and equitable practices, we need to recognize that living in a metropolitan area, not every child has a backyard. Not every child has access to green space that is their own. And we need to start to encourage and develop that environmental education can in fact be growing a garden on one's balcony or deck or space in an apartment complex. I'm very proud to say that in my current community of Queen Victoria Public School, we have several grassroots organizations, including the Queen Victoria Black Student Success Committee, that is trying to do an initiative of balcony gardens throughout Parkdale, encouraging bringing a bit of environmental education and stewardship to those that do not have land in which to do the work. When also providing opportunities, it's important to also recognize that within environmental education, cultural diversity exists. And maybe the shift of environmental education being diverse and equitable and rich may involve growing resources from a global perspective, indoor gardens of growing things like cassava, avocados, bamboo, and teaching children about indoor environmental education on a global level that's inclusive and indicative of their identities. It's also important that as environmental educators, and when we're trying to embrace others and make it more inclusive, make community members of the Black community, the Indigenous community, and those of other intersectionalities part of the framework about making the connections of how impact and intent go hand in hand. When we create environmental spaces to cultivate food, we are in fact impacting resources such as air and other sustainable pieces that are important to our quality of life. Also making an understanding and clear the fact of it's our actionable steps in a responsive, political, vocal manner with concrete actions are the steps towards change for the better in preserving our environment and our culture and our way of being. And finally, I'd like to understand that we need to recognize that as society is changing, as we start to come out of COVID, that environmental education is now urban environmental education. And how do we now transform urban spaces into environmental hubs to encourage people to now go and venture outdoors when conditions afford itself to do so? And that includes relooking about how urban art is contextualized and blended into the current landscapes in the metropolitan city of Toronto. And those are some lenses that I would like to present to this group in reflection and thinking about misconceptions of people of color are not interested in environmental education. And I go back to the work of Dorcetta Taylor in 2018. She wrote an article entitled Racial and Ethnic Differences in Students' Readiness, Identity, Perceptions of Institutional Diversity and Desire to Join the Environmental Workforce, where she describes in her research and her writing that there are voices of racialized individuals within environmental education. And what are we doing as people involved in environmental education and in education in general to bring up the identity, the voices, the stories, the experiences of those that are not heard. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for your comments. Those are really, those are wonderful thoughts. And I really appreciate you providing some resources as well to help people, you know, continue to learn about this once this webinar is done. Rod, you're back with us at this point in time. Would you like to finish off your last few minutes just before I introduce Fikile?
I'm wondering if maybe I could do that at the end after, because I'm obviously these difficulties are because I'm running out of battery, I think.
Not a problem, Rod. Yeah, I'll introduce Fikile and then we'll bring you back in at the end.
Thank you.
Okay, at this point, I would like to introduce you to Fikile Nxumalo, who is one of my colleagues at OISE. She's an assistant prof in the Department of Curriculum, Teaching and Learning at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, what we commonly refer to as OISE, at the University of Toronto, where she directs the Childhood Place Pedagogy Lab. Her scholarship focuses on reconceptualizing place-based and environmental education within current times of ecological precarity. The scholarship is rooted in perspectives from Indigenous knowledges, Black feminist geographies, and critical post-humanist theories. Her research and pedagogical interests are informed by her experiences growing up in Eswatini and working as a teacher with children and educators in North American settler colonial contexts. My research and practice collaborations, her research, I'm reading from her bio. Her research and practice collaborations include the Te Toronto Circle Lab, the Common Worlds Research Collective, the E-Childhood Pedagogies Collaborative, and Planet Texas 2050. And her latest book is called Decolonizing Place in Early Childhood Education, which I'm sure many people are going to want to read after today's session. It was published in 2019 by Routledge and examines the entanglements of place, environmental education, childhood, race, and settler colonialism in early learning contexts. Fikile, welcome so much. Welcome to have you in this part of this webinar today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with everyone. So I'm going to just talk briefly about my research and pedagogical concerns as they relate to the issues of anti-Blackness and settler colonialism. So as an early childhood educator and early childhood scholar, my interests constellate around finding ways both pedagogically and conceptually to unsettle what I see as the anti-Blackness and settler colonialism that is embedded in environmental education for young children in North America. So anti-Blackness, for instance, is in the overwhelming whiteness of most nature-based preschools and kindergartens, and the ways in which nature education for Black children is often positioned from deficit perspectives. So for instance, as a way to bring nature to certain children who are seen as at risk or as lacking so-called normal connections with nature. And this perpetuates what Catherine McKittrick calls Black narratives of unbelonging. So in my work, I critique the ways in which nature education is then positioned as a form of rescue for Black and other racially marginalized children, while for privileged, predominantly white children, such as those attending the overwhelmingly white nature kindergartens and preschools, which have seen a huge growth in North America, nature's positioned as a space for play, discovery, and a return to childhood innocence. So at the same time, the inclusion of Black children in nature education, when it does occur, can also at times assimilate them into the settler colonial nation building project. So where Canada and the United States so-called pure nature awaits their learning and discoveries, which I see as a reenactment of colonialism's terra nullius through this love for empty wilderness. So in my work, I'm interested in bringing forward different ways of practices relating and as well as concepts that can create different kinds of Black and Indigenous relations in environmental ed for young children and different kinds of world making. So in other words, I'm interested in education that creates possibilities for young children to encounter nature places and their more than human inhabitants in ways that resist deficit constructions of Black nature relationships, that resist erasures of Indigenous land and life, and that resist assimilation of Black children into the settler colonial project. So I see a need for educational places and spaces where both Black and Indigenous children's relations with the natural world are affirmed, where Black and Indigenous land relationships and knowledges are affirmed, without also ignoring the structural violences of Indigenous land dispossession, of environmental racism, and where the environmental learning of Black and Indigenous and other racially minoritized children is not premised on inclusion into developmental trajectories that are reliant on locating deficits in particular children. And I just wanted to share the words of a student in my grad seminar, Amanda Mirpo, who's given me permission to share her experiences that I think capture a lot of what I've been saying. She says, I work in a predominantly white, affluent, independent school. So much of the work we end up doing is so white, reinforcing this idea that white people own the outdoors and the land too is theirs. We treat so much outdoor ed this way in schools too with young kids. At my school, for example, most of our outdoor ed program focuses on experiences that our white affluent students already have in their own lives and will already be successful at. We go camping at large affluent summer camp facilities. They're all named after Indigenous groups or take on Indigenous names without actually having any Indigenous affiliation or meaningful Indigenous ways of knowing. And we talk about conquering nature, conquering winter. Demographically, our small BIPOC population is more urban and less affluent and or international students from African countries. In turn, this population is often new to or less familiar with the practices of something like affluent white Canadian summer camp experiences and mentalities. So our outdoor ed ends up reinforcing that our affluent white students are better in the outdoors or more natural to it, while also reinforcing colonial ideals of what it means to take control of the outside world and what that relationship should be. And so I think Amanda's words capture so much of the dominant ways in which environmental education is constructed to reinforce both settler colonialism and anti-Blackness. So in my work with young children and educators, I'm interested in troubling these discourses that Amanda illustrates. So two guiding ethos that I've found helpful one is from Black feminist geographer Catherine McKittrick, who states that Black matters are spatial matters, and another from Dolores Calderon, who states that place is foundational to settler colonialism. So bringing these into dialogue for me means that early childhood research and teaching that centers race and place and is situated in settler colonial contexts such as Canada, it's always important to be always thinking how to avoid erasures of Black Indigenous and Black Indigenous relations to place. So for just one example, in my recent research in Central Texas, I've recently written about a young Black girl who I call Simone, who was one of 2 Black children in the kindergarten class that I worked with. And the ways in which, for me, subverting anti-Blackness meant creating space for her curiosities, being on the lookout for ways to invite her into relations with the more than human, and to pay attention to her relational placemaking and to her stories of her family's land relations in Texas. At the same time, it was also important that Simone participated in the curriculum that myself and my co-researcher brought to the children in relation to learning about the particular place where we were as Indigenous Coetican lands that had particular land and water stories, which we shared with the children. And so I call these small everyday stories of Simone's encounters with the Creek pedagogies of testifying, witnessing, which are small, but I think important modes of resisting anti-Blackness in environmental ed contexts and the silences on issues of race and broader environmental discourses. So in subverting anti-Blackness, these pedagogies are always on the lookout for the ways in which Black children can be invited into relations with the more than human, as I mentioned. Such invitations may be explicit, such as through curriculum that stories Black nature relations, or simply just providing the space for Black children's curiosities. And I think maybe I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Fikile. I encourage people to really think about what is being said by our presenters and to pop questions or comments into the chat. And I'd be happy to share those with our presenters for them to address. Rod, I can see you're back in the warmth at this point, and we do appreciate you trying the grand adventure of taking us outside for your webinar. Thank you. But did you have a few more comments that you wanted to make to wrap up your earlier talk?
I do. Thank you. Sorry about that, everybody. The battery on my phone drained rapidly, and I think it wrecked the connection that I had to my iPad. So I'm back inside. So hopefully, I don't know if you can remember what I was saying, but I was talking about my mom's influence. I talked about the people being welcoming at in college, and then my friend Melissa encouraging me to come and work in outdoor education. And the reason why I share these things, what I've noticed when I look at this story is that I was influenced by multiple people over a period of time, and it had an impact on me. I love the outdoors, and I decided to follow that path and end up working in this field. And, you know, Mel and I often wonder, well, why aren't there more of us, more Black people leading, teaching? You know, it's one thing to teach the students, which is great, but they're getting, you know, in our department, they're getting, you know, a few trips a year, or now with COVID, we're outreaching to them, either virtually or in person. But it's only 2 Black people right now in the department. And so the young Black students that are seeing us, that are having these experiences, aren't really seeing enough of themselves represented. And I know that, I've forgotten her name now, but the woman who presented at part 1 of this series, you know, she pointed out that it's underrepresentation that's happening in a lot of our fields. You know, Black kids are told, hey, look there's LeBron James, basketball, there's football for you, there's track for you. These are the traditional things that Black youth tend to kind of grow up to do as far, you know, in terms of sports, right? I know it's a very narrow example, but there's no outdoor people. Where are the outdoor heroes, you know? And I was happy to hear that, you know, Harriet Tubman was pointed out as being an outdoor hero. She was absolutely that, but we don't really hear about that, and that, you know, that legacy hasn't been carried on. So I think it's up to us to kind of raise up a generation of people who want to be teaching outside, and the hope is that some people of color, or Black people, will start to become the educators outdoors in the future. So we need to inspire a love for outdoors in children, youth, and adults, both in outdoor education and recreation. We need to allow the land to be their teacher as often as possible. So that means getting them outside, not just a few times, but constantly, and using the land as a teacher, not as just a place, as a classroom, but using it as a teacher, so that we can really draw that connection. And that's good for, and it's not just about Black kids, it's about all students, all children. We need to shift our thinking in terms of what's possible. We as humans, we often think of the roadblocks or the things that can't happen. Well, let's shift our way of thinking about the weather, and, you know, if it's okay or not to go outside. I also have a strong desire to, where various communities are invited to enjoy outdoor experiences together, sharing their knowledge. As was pointed out by Alison, you know, the outdoors is not just for white people. We know all around the planet, all kinds of people go outside and for extended periods of time learning about their environment. And it's just a natural thing to do. And so to me, there's so much knowledge within our communities. It doesn't matter what your background is. It's there to be shared with others in an outdoor setting. And almost finally, I'd say ecology seems to get it. When I look at the natural world around me, the land teaches me that it needs everything in balance to work together. When you remove a species, it doesn't work so well. And this is what I'm seeing within the humanities, that we tend to separate and pull apart rather than join together. If we take the time to join together and work together and share our knowledge, we will see a change, and we will see diversity happen, and we'll get more voices, especially in the out of doors. Thank you for being present to hear my part of our story. I'm just a drop of water with a bunch of other drops of water that's making up this wonderful lake. Hopefully that all made sense.
It absolutely did make sense. You're being incredibly cogent, and I would say that of all of our presenters today, you're introducing us, to many of us, to ideas that are really important for us to hear about, and we appreciate the recommendation to resources as well as to your thoughts on this idea. I know that we've got a couple of questions that we haven't dealt with yet in the chat, and I'll turn this open to any of our panelists for today. Kelly asked the question earlier, what are some actions that cities can take to make their green spaces or waterfronts more accessible, particularly for BIPOC or low income folks? And that's moving beyond just increasing walkability or public transit. So what would be your ideas around that? Actions that cities can take to make their green spaces and waterfronts more accessible?
I can share something that I think one of the things is, like I had mentioned before about the whole concept of opportunity. I think a lot of families don't really know that many of these things exist. So I think maybe I remember speaking with Rod yesterday, maybe they do need to have more public service announcements or things on TV that make it so that more people have access to saying, hey, I can go to this park. This park is free. I can go spend time in the Rouge. I can go spend time at the Humber River. I think a lot of times many people don't know that it exists, and also the complexities of life may make it difficult for families to access it in terms of time and finances. So to answer that question, it's a bigger picture. There's so many layers to that. It's kind of like an onion, and when you decide to peel away each of the layers, you'll realize that there may be an underlying problem we haven't necessarily looked at.
Would any of our other presenters like to address that question?
I think if we're trying to encourage people of African heritage to go out and enjoy the outdoor spaces, I challenge the city and the Conservation Authority to develop a method, a campaign that shows Blacks in these spaces. When we do see what is being published, I don't see individuals reflective of myself in these spaces. So why would an individual of my identity, my cultural heritage, venture there? So it's how do you make the engagement in such a way that honors identity, but opens it up for you could be here too. You are here. It is your city.
Thank you very much, Matthew. We had another question too, coming from Maha. Maha said that BIPOC are often boxed into neat categories, like basketball as an outdoor experience. How do we deconstruct these very ingrained mainstream social expectations that are in children's minds?
I think it goes along with what the gentleman before me, sorry, is it Matthew, was just saying. When we're represented publicly in the media in doing outdoor things, outdoor pursuits, then it makes sense. It's a cultural shift, though, right? Our culture seems to think that it's all parcelizing. This is for that person, that's for that person, and we don't really tout the outdoors here in Toronto anyway, and we don't talk about it a lot. It's not pushed. I know that in other places around the world, it's a fabric of their society. Being outside is just commonplace. It's what you do. So that's kind of what I think needs to happen. Is we have to, as a society, make that shift to go, okay, this outside for one is for everybody, but it's what we do. It's who we are. I don't know if that helps or not, but I think that's a big part of it. And so when children see that, I know with my own children, all they know is outdoors. And that's because that's what we do. And they're passionate about it. They can't wait to be outside. They get it.
Thank you, Rod. Would any other panelists like to address that question? Well, I'm going to give you another one from Sebastian then. Sebastian says, I love the realization that social justice is the same or equals environmental education that Matthew suggested to us earlier, as biodiversity and human diversity is the strength of our entire planet. A central idea of Black Lives Matter, reclaiming spaces and places is key, and Rod's experience in the forest and his feeling of welcome or not being welcome highlights the importance of diverse and equitable practices through our curriculum in different grades. Not every child has a backyard or access to green spaces, as a couple of the presenters have already said. So let's take walks and build ecosystems into our classrooms and our balconies. And his question that goes along with that, what are some examples of success stories of Black nature relations?
I can talk about that. I've seen some examples actually with my students. So I'm in the virtual space right now, but even when I was working in an actual building, one of the things that I wanted to show my students or the students in the eco team was that nature is here. Like, we don't always have to go to a place. So sometimes it could be, if you have the schoolyard, you could start with the schoolyard and start to observe things like the squirrels, the dandelions, the way things are changing, the interaction between birds, the interaction between other animals. And then when they start start to notice things, become more aware, they start to respect it and appreciate it. And then that goes home. Oh, mom, or whoever it is I'm speaking to at home. Hello, family member. We did this today and we noticed this. And it tends to grow, and then they can encourage their families, if it's possible, to do more outdoor activities. It can happen, and I've seen it happen. It's just a matter of shifting the way that we see school and shifting the way that we feel as our role as educators, because we can do a lot more to expand that and that way of thinking.
And Fikile, I know you got to slip out to another meeting. If you need to go, just know that we're very appreciative of your talk today. Thank you. And we hope maybe you'll come back and speak again. I think many would like to hear you speak more about the work you're doing with young children in this context as well. So I think we might have to schedule you again at another time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fikile.
Thank you.
I know we had a couple other questions. I'm just tracking them in the chat. One of them came from one of our OISE teacher candidates, Catherine. And Catherine says, is there any advice that any of the panelists have for teacher candidates to make environmental education accessible for all?
Well, my only thought is simply when you become a teacher, go outside as much as you can. Don't see it as a barrier. And take a look at that curriculum and see how the land opens it up for you. Try to shift the way that you see it. You know, when you're thinking about art, for instance, see the art in nature, then use that art. Go out and do things. Do some ephemeral sculptures, like one of the programs that one of my colleagues developed. You know, or do some nature leaf rubbings are a fantastic way of engaging. Those are, and once you start to see those connections, they go from there. It's not and it's not difficult stuff. It's just about using the creativity that's inside of you already, and then going out and bringing it alive. Really spending time outside yourself, so that you start to see the patterns, the cycles, the way it works, and then you'll very quickly see where the math, science, art, history, all of it comes alive outside. That's my 2 cents.
And the central coordinating principal that you work with, Rod, David Hockard-Bodlowski, has popped a comment into the chat agreeing with you that the outdoors isn't, you know, it's not just the space that we take kids out into for recess and lunch. It really should be an integral part of teaching and learning and supporting the growth and development of youth. Matthew, how do you encourage your teachers to do this? Because you're in a really dense urban environment at Queen Victoria. So how do you accomplish that with your teachers on staff?
Well, our teachers are are very much encouraged to take their kids outside as much as possible. Most recently, I took a couple of the intermediate classes for an urban walk as part of their social studies curriculum, having them explore the history of Parkdale and the impact and the changes and how green space has evolved a couple of mornings last week. So it's myself modeling it for some of my teachers that are aware that I'm doing it, but it's also allowing my teachers the autonomy to engage in every curriculum area outdoors. I've seen them engage in drama, music, similar to what Rod has said. They've taken almost every opportunity while we have the green space abutted to our school, held by the City of Toronto Parks and Recreation Department, to take them outside exploring every facet of environmental education.
Yeah, fair enough. Nikki made a point too that we have to get beyond this notion of you know who owns outdoor spaces, that we really need to move beyond notions of community watch, which have really perpetuated racist stances in the past. And we often see notions of, you know, who belongs in public spaces as being a really problematic concept. I think, you know, Rod, you spoke about this a little bit, about your experience in just in the ravine recently. Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
And you know, Hillary and everyone here tonight, this is the flip side of COVID. COVID has forced Toronto urban schools in the heart of the old city of Toronto, old city of York, old city of East York, to really take the kids outside to explore their neighborhoods in a different context than ever before. And having the community see that we as educators are taking our kids outside exploring these spaces. When I took the grade 6-7 class last week out along Parkdale, along Queen Street down to King near Dufferin, and we did a community walk and visited the public spaces. and the community gardens that a few of our community partners have developed. The kids were amazed about what they saw. They would say to me, Mix Webb, oh, I walked by this 7 times. I didn't realize what was actually here. So taking them into the spaces, it developed a sense of awareness and a better appreciation for the green spaces within Parkdale.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sensitive to time at this point. This has been such a rich webinar, and I'm so appreciative of our speakers. Thank you to all 4 of you, especially to Alison and Matt and Rod, who are still in the space with us, and also to Fikile, who had to disappear for another meeting. Can I ask everybody to join me in thanking our presenters for their time today? I will say that we need to continue the conversation. And if our presenters want to speak to that, how can we continue this conversation once this webinar is done?
Well, I'd like to say that I think what we do is we talk about it regardless of what you look like in your homes, with your children, with your families, with your friends, when you're out. And to me, part of the dream would be to know that groups of people who don't look like me are sitting around chatting and talking about this problem and talking about how, talking about the injustices without me being present. You know, I think that's where it is. That's where it needs to happen, because that's a heart thing, not just a mind thing. It means that you get it, you understand. And I've seen that with some of my colleagues that they're, you know, that are white, and they have a heart for changing the way things have been, because they're not satisfied, and they know it's not right. So yes, keep talking about it with your families, with your friends, and challenging each other, you know, and having more of these types of conversations as well within education, and getting outside, have those conversations outdoors.
And Matthew or Alison, would you like to address that question as a wrap up?
I completely agree with what Rodway said. The outdoors is a space for everybody to enjoy and to experience. And I think as long as we shift our focus and we shift the way that we've been doing things in the past, we can make those changes. But it's up to us as the adults to decide that this is the way we want to go.
Thank you, Alison.
You're welcome.
Matthew, would you like last word?
I concur.
There you go. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful webinar.